Okay, hello everyone. Poets, can I get a thumbs up from you if you can hear me? Excellent. I want to say hello to everyone out there who are joining us tonight. I'm Michael Wiegers, the editor-in-chief of Copper Canyon Press, and I'm coming to you live from my home in Port Townsend, Washington, which is on Coast Salish Sklallam land. Thank you for joining us for this evening in celebration of poetry and creativity. We're getting ready to start our live book launch reading featuring Tashani Doshi, Marianne Boruch, Shangyang Fang, and Laura Kozisky. They're each going to read from their gorgeous new books, and after the readings, we'll have a brief conversation, a question and answer. This is the 7th edition of our launch party live stream series. Since the pandemic began, these online events have allowed us to connect with all of you out there, our readers, literally all over the world. And it's been a real joy during what's been a challenging time. Tonight's launch party will also raise funds for Copper Canyon Press, and to help us, and those funds are going to help us publish another extraordinary season of poetry books in the coming year. I want to send a special hello and thank you to our hardworking board of directors, whom I know are also out there watching along with us. And a thanks as well to our donors who make everything we do possible. And that includes generous funders like the National Endowment for the Arts, For Culture, Seattle Office of Arts and Culture, CLMP, and Lannan Foundation. And of course, a big thank you to all of you out there who might make a gift to Copper Canyon tonight. I'm not going to wait too long before introducing tonight's poets, but I want to go over a few quick logistics to make sure we're all comfortable in this shared virtual space. If it would help you to see closed captioning, you can enable captions at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Additionally, if it would help you to follow along as our poets read their poems, you can find a PDF of the poems they'll read in order by following a link that Marissa is about to drop into the chat. And speaking of Marissa Vito, our digital content manager at Copper Canyon, I want to thank her for the work she's doing behind the scenes right now to run this show. We've probably all become familiar and very accustomed to online events like this and may not realize that there are loads of people like Marissa who are behind the scenes making everything work. And I want to express my personal gratitude to her for all the work that she's done to pull this together and make it possible. Tonight, Marissa is also going to be live streaming this reading simultaneously to Facebook, and the event will be recorded and shared on our website. You can send a note of encouragement to tonight's readers and to Marissa, or just say hello by clicking on the chat icon down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So one thing that's kind of great about these online readings is that you don't have to wait in line at the end of the reading to get your copy of a book. You can do it at any time. Tonight, instead of purchasing these new releases, we're inviting you to make a donation to Copper Canyon Press, and we will happily send the books you request. As a nonprofit independent book publisher, we've been entirely dedicated to poetry for almost 50 years, and we literally could not continue the invigorating, challenging, and sustaining work of making poetry books without your donations. So again, thank you in advance, and we'll drop that donation link into the chat so that you can make a gift at any time and reserve your copy of these books, which I'm confident you're about to fall in love with, just as I did when I first read them. So to those of you who are joining us, this is a Copper Canyon Press launch party live stream. I want to say welcome. So let's go ahead and kick things off. Our first reader, Tashani Doshi, is currently based in Abu Dhabi and could not be with us here live. So she sent in a video to share with you in celebration of her newest book. Tashani is an award-winning writer and dancer of Welsh Gujarati descent. Born in Madras, India in 1975, she received a master's in writing from Johns Hopkins University and worked in London in advertising before returning to India in 2001, where a chance encounter with the famed choreographer Chandralekha led her to an unexpected career in dance. She has published 7 books of fiction and poetry, including Everything Begins Elsewhere and The Girls Are Coming Out of the Woods, both published by Copper Canyon Press. Her new book, A God at the Door, beautiful cover, it was just published by Copper Canyon. As I mentioned before, she's a visiting professor of creative writing at New York University in Abu Dhabi, and otherwise lives on a beach with a pack of dogs that she loves in Chennai, near Chennai in Tamil Nadu, India. So please join me in watching this video from Tishani.
Hi everyone, this is Tashani. I'm sorry not to be in real time with you, but it's either too late or too early where I am in the world at the moment. It's such an honor to share this platform with these wonderful poets and to offer you these poems from a God at the Door. I'm going to start with a poem called Advice for Pliny the Elder, Big Daddy of Mansplainers. Great man, now that you are dead, allow me to squeeze your hand. The sage bushes in Umbria are heavy with bees, so I'm killing them with hypnosis. I am a mere woman, inferior lettuce. But I understand swoon, aka mirabilia. I fill this cup with nectar and offer it to soothe your Vesuvian wounds. I share your love of baths and classifications, and sure, if we had to point to a god in the sky, why not call him Thunderbolt? I too believe sewers are the great architectural invention. I do all my searching on roads. It has been 2,000 years, so we can forgive some of your assertions. The sea mouse who helps whales find their way by parting the brows above their eyes, the one-eyed humans and skypods with umbrella feet, the whole exotic bestiary. If I had no mouth but could live off the smell of apples, I'd move to Kashmir. Scratch that, maybe Sussex. Once a month, when the blood comes, I go out to lie in whatever field I find, to feel the scorch rise and the crops wither. Our powers are much depleted. I can stand among men in full swing of my menstruous, and nothing will dim their ability to tell me about me. There are birds I can't name at the window this morning, and dogs in the valley beyond who are using their bell-shaped lungs to announce their happiness again and again and again. Nothing has changed. We worry about the wane and winnow. In your time, perhaps the ladies used bits of cut-up smocks, but these days we have menstrual cups. Desire is still a kind of ruin. That silly bird fluttering against the window net, trying to get in, the body's steady lilt towards oblivion. They say you had a sister, like Shakespeare's, mostly overlooked, that it was she who first noticed the smoky clouds that sent you on your way. Dear Pliny, I guess you never heard the one about curiosity. The cat is real. The earth never tires of giving birth. If you get too close to a volcano, you should know it may erupt. Self. And when they ask, what kind of animal would you be? I always say gazelle or lark, never cockroach, even though they'll outlast us all. Once I dreamed I had a body with 2 heads, like those ancient figures from the Zarka River, bitumen eyes, trunks of reed and hydrated lime, built thick and flat without genitals, nothing shameful to eject except tears. We all want to be monuments, but can't help shoving our fingers in dirt. Imagine a life in childhood, one face to the womb, another to the future. What we remember is the road, peering through a lattice at dusk, the trauma of burial. Will we have terracotta armies to see us through? Will we be alone with the maggots? How good the rain is after a failed romance, never mind the muddy bloomers. We are appalled by life, and still any chance we get, we emerge from the earth like cicadas to sing and fuck for a moment of triumph. The shock we carry is that the world doesn't need us. Even so, we go collecting parts, an afternoon by the sea, a game of hopping on and off scales, nose low to the ground, looking for that other glove to complete us. Here I am, globe, spinning planet. Tell me, why are you not astonished? And I'll end with the last poem in the book, called Survival. Dear ones who are still alive, I fear we may have overthought things. It is not always a war between celebration and lament. Now we know death is circuitous, not just a matter of hiding in the dark or under a bed, not even a slingshot for our loved ones to carry. It changes nothing. Ask me to build a wall, and I will build it straight. When the end came, were you watching TV or picnicking in a field with friends? Was the tablecloth white? Did you stay silent or fight? I hope by now you've given up the fur coat, the frequent flyer miles. In the hours of waiting, I heard a legend about a woman who was carried off by winds, a love ballet between her and the gods which involved only minor mutilations. How I long to be a legend, to stand at the dock and stare at this or that creature who survived, examine its nest, marvel at a tusk that can rake the sea floor for food. Hope is a noose around my neck. I have traded in my rollerblades for a quill. Here is the boat, the journey, the camp. If we want to arrive, we must push someone off the side. It is impossible to feel benign. How many refugees does it take to build a mansion? I ask again, shall we wait or run? Here is winter, the dense pack ice. Touch it. It is a reminder of our devastation, a kind of worship, an incantation.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did, and as much as I enjoy Tishani's poetry. Although she couldn't be here to join us in person, I'm nonetheless, thrilled that Copper Canyon is able to and dedicated to publish distinguished voices from across the globe and its time zones. And our next reader, while Marianne Boruch is based in a Heartland's time zone, her newest book is nonetheless also global in its concerns. And it's my pleasure to introduce her and her new book, Bestiary Dark, another beautiful book that our designers have made. I thought it was appropriate that we just heard from Tishani referencing Pliny the Elder in her poem, in her first poem. Many of you may already know that Pliny wrote what is considered the first encyclopedia, the Naturalis Historia. And while he died while attempting to rescue, and how he died while attempting to rescue friends and family from the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. In Bestiary Dark, Marianne references his natural history as she considers the fires that devastated Australia shortly after she returned from her time as a 2019 Fulbright senior lecturer at the University of Canberra, Australia. It's at once a natural history of her own and an elegy for the animal lives lost to climate change and fire. Author of 10 previous collections of poetry, a memoir, and 3 books of essays, Marianne is a Kingsley Tufts Award winner, a Guggenheim and NEA Fellow, and she has had residencies at the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center, at Yaddo, McDowell, the American Academy in Rome, and 2 national parks, Denali and Isle Royale. She founded Purdue University's MFA program in 1987 and has subsequently taught as a Fulbright professor at the University of Edinburgh. She and her husband, David Dunlap, live in West Lafayette, Indiana. Please, Marianne, read us some of your wonderful poems and welcome tonight.
Sorry, had to unmute. All right. Thank you, Michael, and thank you, everyone at Copper Canyon, and hello, everyone out there. I want to thank, too, the stellar John Pierce at Copper Canyon, the wonderful managing editor, and also Judith Nigalia Crispin, the Australian part Indigenous artist whose image is on the cover of the book. She was kind enough to let us borrow it, thanks to the Fulbright Commission and also the University of Canberra for my time in Australia. I'm going to just read these poems, and they don't really have titles. I will pause between them. Cows. They have stupid eyes, friends so dear to me wrote. But I'd bring her back to see sheep in the paddock step out of their fleece like the gleaming bodies she knew from the bath, washing child after child those years. She'd like that. Poet, painter, silenced by cells gone ruthless, not telling one of us. I can't hold that against her. The stricken body gets so familiar it turns to a rag. It must be hung on a line to dry. I tell her, I know now what's solitary and what's not. Sheep, their abrupt nakedness inside that fence wasn't a simple matter. Blade and blood, radiant fold, unfold, distant under one giant eucalyptus for shade. Bare bodies by way of the shearing, a shock. Nor the old masters, what they did, never easy either. To brush in a backdrop, burnt umber and bone black warming up each room in their paintings, laying down sorrow as context, as drapes that part only at the most beloved lit, whatever it is, what she left. So you're remembering sheep now too. The archangel came into my dream last night to bug me. Domesticated creatures gone wild. What's it to you? I cheekied back. All the roaming feral ones, cattle, goats, brumbies, intrusives too, like rabbits, rabbits, rabbits? No, no camels either. I said, nope, never spotted a single camel or rabbit out there. But each of what I saw, skinny sleepwalkers crossing roads out of habit to water as if a small blue waited suspended in drought, whether real or not. Dry as a bone, those rivers, we cliched together and drank our swill like the old men we'd never be, sit around repeating themselves. The river dust unto dust. The river need not apply. River no rain for 8 months and counting. Every outback spot you look, a once river, an unriver. I'm reading a book on this, I blurted out to the indigenous elder. Sure you are, he said. I told him, see the boxes I checked? X, pretty much agree. X, most sick at heart agree. We get there just as some asshole, forgive me, on a joyride in the outback runs her down, the emu, and keeps going. After all, he's got a planet to desecrate. A very long line of feathered bloody something she's lifting now and falling back to the road, and slower each time. Don't fool yourself. It wasn't wind, not a broken hinge crying out to open a door. Our worthless offerings. Oh, emu, here's our numb speechlessness. But there are those who drive to, who cares if I kill, and never regret. We willed that news to her, medieval as prayer, all abruptly stricken in the Flinders, the hand-wringing two of us, as another acolyte stepped from his truck with a huge plumber's wrench to bash her kindly a good 1, 2, 3. Her oh each time fainter. Oh, on a loop. Reader, you who think poems should never story too much or render news of the day, I need to get this right. Grief is human speak for emu. Night's quiet since then. A tiny pre-kangaroo slips out of its mother's low sweet spot, blind as certain insects to follow the spit road she tongued down her belly for this bit of pre-stars and vapor. Pre-meteor whatnot, inchworming up that line of seasick wet, pioneering what's possible toward the pouch to be a pinky, then months to fur out there past flood and drought and fire unto big or really big, a gray or a red, matter-of-fact leaping marvel of the bush. Over coffee on a clear afternoon, the scientists 30 years astonished at this route that would never make it fully fleshed to MapQuest. The Great Salt Road, the Great Silk Road, nameless multiple alpha omega great roads of blood and pillage and threat and greed. The human movie glitters its awful special effects. What to make of this world's greatest, the Great Spit Road, warm wool bent back, narrow, shiny, and silk. Emu, you woke up. I did, or I do, or I am, or I almost. What about those two hand wringers who dragged you off the road? The Americans? I heard the numb knot in their heads trying to untie itself. Emu, what about that killer savior of the heaviest wrench, stopping his truck, smashing you to grit and godforsaken once, twice, 3 times, to his, I'm sorry, that bastard of love, my inner eyelid, the second one that opens sideways. I lay there and saw what I saw. And the murderous driver, all exhaust and cutthroat fumes be his. Where are you now, Emu? Exactly where you are, in the italics. Spirits released by fire and fear, freed of their bodies to rise from ash and soot where they dropped or were caught by the burning groves. Koalas and kangaroos, ancient orders of wallabies, skinks and lizards, the hidden wealth of nowhere else, cherished mammals and reptiles, the perennial question mark of platypus, so weirdly bits of both, plus bird. As for the solitary wallaroos, they too, out of their flesh and blood in some kind of between world, not like a dream or a bardo, not like anything I could humanly tell you. But their shapes must be gauzy and strange, with thought, really a second thought, circling the charred, toothy sticks that used to be trees, circling slow, the way medieval artisans took their time to cut into wood and link up for their bestiaries, liking to monster them a little, add an extra leg or head to those creatures, yet another scare to the other grim wonders of their time and time again. The hand goes looser and rogue, drawing a thing never seen, though the claims were real enough, gone whimsical, cartoonish to us, who demand exactitude, and always how many left on the planet, and why, oh, why is that? Our why falls from the sky in embers to spot fire any grassy place close, is lightning that strikes from smoke disguised as clouds over the no-rain bush, or the city making its own weather, is eucalyptus oil in the leaves, sparking the next tree to tree to tree, or its secret and lethal as air equals gas, our carbon, our fault toward the long gone. A poet in Canberra emails, the poems should indeed be dark. So many animals, at least 3 billion into ash and charred bone, or who am I and where, numbed hectare on hectare of blackened gum tree leaves, ruined waterways. I despair, the last sentence as she slipped off screen. Then to find it from the old French de parara, the added de, an emphatic reversal of sperara, to hope. Despair, the word has a history, and I'm wrong. No afterlife in it.
Thank you, Marianne. I just want to, as you were reading, I was again remembering how during a previous book we were working on with you, and you were driving across Australia. And I just want to say this for the rest of the people in the audience. Marianne would find a spot in the middle of the outback where she could get some sort of reception and power so that she could work on the proofs of her book. And she would recount to us and to John Pierce what was going on while making this trek for several weeks across the outback and recounting to us stories. It's this book is really wonderful, and I hope you all get a chance to see the beautiful cover as well. And I apologize, Marianne, for not mentioning Judith Nangala Crispin at the start. The art is extraordinary, and I hope that I get to see it in person someday. So. We have 2 more terrific poets to hear from tonight. Thank you, Marianne. We'll come back to you in a little bit. But in case you're feeling as inspired as I am, we're going to again drop that donation link into the chat window below. So you can click through at any time to help Copper Canyon Press, to help us keep publishing daring, bright, socially conscious poetry collections like these. Whereas, so I want to just jump into our next reader while you're looking at that donation link for us. Our next reader, our third reader, is Shangyang Fang, reading from his debut collection, Burying the Mountain. Xiangyang grew up in Chengdu, China, and composes poems both in English and Chinese. While studying civil engineering at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, he realized his bigger passion lies in the architecture of language, and subsequently committed himself to poetry. His name, Shangyang, originates from Chinese mythology and refers to a one-legged bird whose dance brought forth flood and rain, not unlike what we're suffering right now in the Pacific Northwest, I suppose. But it seems, with a name like that, he was born and named into the world of poetry and metaphor. He's a recipient of the Joy Harjo Poetry Award and the Gregory Donahue International Poetry Prize. And I first had the pleasure of meeting Shangyang a couple of years ago when he was on a fellowship in poetry at the Michener Center for Writers at the University of Texas. I was immediately incontrovertibly struck by his poems. And as an editor, it's always a thrill when you just know, when poems announce themselves to your attention and demand your attention. And I knew from the start when I read Shangyang's student poems that he was going to write a beautiful book. He's currently a Stegner Fellow at Stanford University, where he's been studying with Louise Gluck and Patrick Phillips and others in that esteemed fellowship program. We're absolutely thrilled that he's joining us this evening, and we're thrilled that he's the newest poet to publish a first book with Copper Canyon Press, Bearing the Mountain, another beautiful collection, or another beautiful cover. So Shangyang, please read us some poems.
Thank you, Michael. I just want to express the deep gratitude for Copper Canyon Press and the fantastic team for making space for this book and making space for poetry. So if you want to support the press, please, you can click the link below. I'm going to read only 2 poems. Chronicles on Disappearance. There are 7 sadnesses that don't belong to men. 7 cicadas making one motorcycle, testing its engine in the dark. Everyone lugs their sorrow in their boots. Everyone a half-open kitchen window with souls sultry as boiled meat. Invalid are all objects closed to sorrow. Don't wake them up, don't look, so that they let you, me, be your, myself. After all, our eyelids, another empress of a tyrannic dawn. In this country, go to the grocery in the carcass of a pickup, return with carnivals. In another land, the windshield wipers are the lashes of a monk, lulling the world into one scarlet dusted reverie. On some evenings, above the 3 gorgeous cliffs, the monkeys fold their arms, rocking gently in the rain, identical to stones. The second poem I'm going to read is a bit long, and it's a poem I've read in many occasions. So frankly, I'm a bit tired of it. But since I still hear complaints about the poem being unreadable in the book, so I think I would just save that trouble one more time. It is the only unreadable poem in the book. The rest, I'm sure, is quite readable. It's a poem half in Chinese and half in English. The Chinese part are the onomatopoeia words in Chinese. Hong long long is the sound of thunder. Di di da da is the rain stitching a bell jar or the clock remembering its days as a clepsydra. Putong is the sound of a man stumbling, and ha 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 is the laughter that chases after. Ling ling lang lang is the water sword whacking the Guangdong Chang Chang jade pendants of cold rocks. Sa 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 is the west wind, and pu pu su su is the falling leaves that xiao xiao pian pian with an autumn moon. In fact, su su is the sound of all soft things falling. The tears, su su on the face, the snow, su su, the begonia, su su on the mahogany bone of a folding fan. Su su, the brushstroke paints the rice paper into a landscape of black mountains. Ling ling cong cong, the rivers flow where the inked mountain is not depicted, flow in the uncharted whiteness. The bow strings cao cao like blizzard, the fine strings qie qie like murmur, the melody of a girl playing pipa on the orchid boat back in the Tang dynasty, which we still hear through Bai Juyi's poetry. If the river could speak, would the mountain understand its utterance? The sound of a frog is gua gua gua, which is annoying. If you cannot stand the gua gua gua, please put the frog into a boiler. The hard part, try not to mourn for the frog. The sound of the autumn moon is 寻寻觅觅, 冷冷清清, 凄凄惨惨戚戚, which is also the 点点滴滴 sorrow of Li Qingzhao. Because to mourn the frog, one must speak in the language of frog, which is to gua gua gua. Yi ya ya is a Qingyi singing with yin yin mo mo lips of red beans. Piao piao ran ran is a furbelow yi yi fei fei among the willows and catkins. Shi Wei is the evanescent light of a lantern wrong. Shi Wei is the swan's down evening, a girl calling her beloved. Why don't you come back? Come back. In truth, Shi Wei is Wang Wei writing a poem to the shadow of his leaving friend who promised to come back with a sprig of magnolia to light up the yard. His poem has the sound of clouds spread low on the moving water. The lamplight threads a dim song across the voice of trees that can only be heard by insects and birds. 关关节节拥拥隐隐嗷凄凄簌簌沥沥 are the sounds of birds. 轰轰摇摇会会啼啼周啾寥寥 are the sounds of insects. Pili pala are the firecrackers bumping into the air. Chili gulu is a mouse stealing oil and falling from the chair. Yo yo, the deer sings. Xiao xiao, the horse chases the wind. Xi xi li li, the knuckles of rain knocking windows of a departed train. Zhi liao is the cicada chirping its name. Zhi liao. 知了, Bugu is the cuckoo calling itself. Bugu, cuckoo, cuckoo, bugu. For us, the petals fall with no sound. For the fire ants, the petals hit the ground with a sound as loud as thunder, which is honglong. But what is the ant's onomatopoeia for the thunder and falling flowers? What is the petal's onomatopoeia for the wind that brings forth its own falling? Still we keep hearing the hiss of white, yellow, and blue petals scattered in a bowl bitten by the ant's bitter teeth. Shilili, 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 the rain. Honglong, 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 the thunder. Thank you.
That was really fantastic. Clearly it's not unreadable, but I wonder how one would translate that. That to me seems an impossible task, but I'm hoping that it will be done. Thank you. That was just really fantastic. Our final reader tonight is Laura Kozisky, reading from her new book, Lightning Falls in Love. There's the cover is a strange image by Walter Richard Sickert, and some have suggested that Sickert was actually was it Jack the Ripper, Laura, I think, or was it the Strangler? But it's just this ominous cover, but it's also at once beautiful. Laura is the author of 9 collections of poetry and 7 novels. In reviewing her poetry in the Boston Review, the critic Stephanie Burt has said, Kozisky can encompass the pathos, the pleasure, and the terrifyingly unpredictable limits to the course of one life. Her poems are at once very personal and universal, and in recognition of this, she's received many honors, including the National Book Critics Circle Award for her book Space and Chains, which was published by Copper Canyon Press, as well as the Rilke Prize, the Alice Faye Di Castagnola Award, and the Juniper Prize for Poetry. She's widely regarded for novels such as The Life Before Her Eyes, which was made into a movie of the same name featuring Rachel Evan Wood and Uma Thurman. She's been translated and published into multiple languages and countries. And we recently reissued her career retrospective book in paperback, Where Now? New and Selected Poems. It shouldn't be missed. It's a stunning book of poems. Laura lives in Chelsea, Michigan, and is the Theodore Retke Distinguished Professor at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. About 20 years ago, I walked into Seattle's poetry-only bookstore and asked the owners, who should I be reading? They asked whether I knew Laura Kozisky, and I admitted that, embarrassingly, that I didn't know her poems. They demanded that I pay attention and immediately walked over to the shelf and grabbed a book and put it in my hand. And from that moment on, I've been a fan. Shortly after reading that book, I actually wrote a fan letter to Laura, only to learn that her next book was being published elsewhere. I persisted, and several years later, when her publisher at the time went out of business, she was ready to come to Copper Canyon Press, and we were delighted to have her join us. So Laura, it's great to have you among Copper Canyon and to have you among us tonight reading. Please read us some poems.
Thank you so much. I don't know where I would begin to express how honored I am to have found a home at Copper Canyon for my poems, and to have an editor like Michael, and to be among many of my favorite poets who have been published by the press. I never really dreamed that I would have such luck, and I remain incredibly grateful, and I implore everyone to support the incredible, not mine, but the other many incredible books that are being produced by such an amazing press with an almost mythological now being in the poetry world. I'm going to read two poems. One is sort of long, the other one is sort of short. This is called The House Sitter. And after I read it, you will never ask me to house sit for you, but I wrote it anyway. It's called The House Sitter. Awake from a nap in another family's house, with their dogs snoring beside me, their tiny clocks everywhere chiming. This is not my house. I have to remind myself, this is only my confusion, and this green lace passing over this cheese in this refrigerator does not belong to me. This sound of the ceiling fan is theirs, not mine. But they've left me so much bliss to contemplate. It should be obvious to me, of course, that in another year they'll be divorced. All of this, they'll split it up, I guess, but not with me, between themselves. Still, I own it all this afternoon, all of it, the whole place. I'm not making this up. Smells of roses and this chaos of birds in the backyard at all these feeders, all these seeds just set out for these strangers for free. Wings and songs are all they receive for all of this, as if nature sent these friends of mine some special message, which they themselves might not need to hear, as they, it seems, have chosen themselves not to breed, or not with each other at least, or not yet, which will become sooner or later, never. Not that it's any of my business, my friend's fertility, and both of them left-handed too, apparently. A coincidence? And readers, on every flat surface, there's some book I should probably bother myself to skim at least. No wonder they'll fall so quickly out of love. So many possibilities. Who has time in this life to do all of this? All of this requires a second life, clearly. Although for all I know, they're completely content with this one, more or less, as it is. I've peeked into their medicine chests, of course, wouldn't anyone? And it's just so much hydrogen peroxide, some cotton balls, 100 Q-tips. What must all of these be for? And where do they hide their Tylenol, their dental floss, their Prozac, their Adderall? Perhaps these things travel along with them when they leave, or maybe they decided, not unwisely, to put their prescriptions somewhere I couldn't see them. The temptation, which I'm denying there would have been. No, there are no hiding places here, it seems to me. My God, their freezer, nothing in it. This freezer is a Hollywood horror movie scene, The Fog, The Scream, although in their refrigerator, as I cannot imagine to force myself to forget, not make peace with, not throw it away. For myself, if not for them, there sleeps this wedge of cheese, which naturally, after so many years, has become a bit like a child by now, or at least it seems like a child to me. I'm sorry, something biological, ever changing, quickly outgrowing its little crocheted gown of green. Someday someone will need to name it, feed it, pick it up from school eventually, their little blessing or their terrible miscalculation. And somebody's already watered down the vodka in the pantry, that's for sure. However, such tidiness, such hygiene, with the sole exception of what I fear may be a pubic hair, hers or his, clinging to a pink bar of soap in a shell-shaped dish. This bathroom could be a scrubbing bubbles advertiser's dream. Also, their silverware is silver, literally. Yes, silverware in both fact and theory, and polished and gleaming. Nothing here needs to be more than clean. So could she have believed I wouldn't read it? I spend all morning and a cup of tea, these brittle cups like holding air that's holding tea, with her diary. Nothing in it, really. Not a clue. No future, no present, not even any memories. Just every single day, a few more simple facts. The weather changing, her weight unfluctuating, some story from the newspaper, boy on a rampage, prisoners escape again, or how her mother called, what her mother said, mostly nothing's new with me, how about with you, only one recounting of one peculiar dream in which a man she never names and never mentions again makes a surprise appearance in a parking ramp, and she decides in this dream to trade her car for his. And who wants to hear, let alone read, about other people's dreams? I slide it back into the nightstand where she must have thought that she could hide it from me. How? Why? Then I say aloud to myself as well as to their dog, I must never leave this place. And then to myself, silently, seriously, I must never come back to this place again if I ever leave. And only then does it occur to me to open the jewelry box in the top drawer of the dresser they seem to share so equally between her underthings and his socks, when I lift the lid and see, oh, this is where they keep all their damp and gleaming secrets. The liver of a sparrow, the heart of a dove, the womb of a robin, a magpie's tongue. And this is called When a Bolt of Lightning Falls in Love, and this will be my last poem. When a bolt of lightning falls in love. With an old woman, sex is reinvented as the world's first toaster oven. When lightning falls in love with a middle-aged woman, lightning gives birth to an electric guitar. When lightning falls in love with a married man, his wife becomes an arsonist. When lightning falls in love with an arsonist, she gives birth to a son. When lightning falls in love with my son, I wake up to the streaking comic scream of the fire alarm in the hallway of a motel on the wrong side of an ocean. And I think, thank God, I think All this lightning has always had a plan. And if lightning can make plans, as if lightning goes on, like lightning's plans, and will go on long after I've gone, then my own lightning's work here is almost done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Laura. That was great. I often travel on behalf of the press, and I'm always looking for house sitters, but I need to rethink that now after that poem, or load up my medicine cabinet with lots of hydrogen peroxide and Q-tips. So in a moment, we're going to have a small conversation about the creative process. And before we do that, I want to, again, get serious for a minute and ask you, please, if you've not yet made a gift to Copper Canyon Press this season, please take a moment and consider making a generous contribution. We need to raise $25,000 tonight to help us publish next year's books. And I'm thrilled and humbled that one of Copper Canyon Press's board members, John Branch, has generously offered to match your donations up to $5,000. It's a great opportunity for us, and I hope you will join John and others who are helping us meet our goal. Because of donations like yours, we've been able to publish extraordinary poets like Tashani, Marianne, Shangyang, and Laura. I can't wait to share with you some of the books we have planned for next year. First books alongside translations and books by beloved writers like those who joined us tonight. With your donations, all of you out there are part of making this work possible. Tashani, Marianne, Shangyang, and Laura are all here because of you. And during these months of isolation, I'm so grateful to have them, and by extension, all of you in my days. These poets and all of you in the world of writing and reading draw us out of isolation and into the world. So I'm going to ask you again to consider making a donation at the link we've just posted in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. No gift is too small, but with a donation of $50, we will send you your choice of 2 books by tonight's poets. With a donation of $150, we'll send you all of their books. You'll see right now how it should look when you follow the link to make your donation. And I believe that Marissa will now share a screen with you to show how to do it. Okay, so I want to thank you all so much for your generosity. And rather than a traditional question and answer tonight, I want to ask each of our poets to talk about the role of joy in poetry. Personally, I've always loved the idea that books begin and end in isolation. I believe deeply that a book imparts honor simultaneously to the isolated individual who's writing that book, as well as to the isolated individual who's reading it. However, during the pandemic, we've all experienced enforced isolation, and it hasn't always been pleasant. We've been challenged by the specter of a burning planet, by persistent racial injustice, by pervasive violence, and by the pandemic. And we've turned to poetry, to books to accompany us in our isolation. So I'm hoping that maybe each of you can talk to us a little bit about the place of joy in poetry, and how do you find joy in your own writing, and what's the secret to staying amazed in your poetry? Marianne, would you mind starting us off again, since it was a little while since we heard from you?
Okay, there I am.
There we go.
Well, I mean, I always think of, poets are always into bummer lit, this is our thing. But which is not to say there's not joy in bummer lit, but I think, of course, the easy answer is that poetry, should embrace every single human thing, grief and joy and everything in between. But I think my sense of there's always a kind of a stop time quality in poems I love, and there are some poets. When you read their poems, you feel like in that poem is the source of poetry itself, and those are the, and I guess that would turn into someone's favorite poems. But my own sense of joy in poems, I think, is weirder, but it has a kind of time stop quality to it. I think I know when it's the sweet thing is one's attention while one is writing a poem. I always ascribe to the begging bowl theory, where you put out your begging bowl and try to go as blank as possible and wait for something to fall in and then just follow that. I'm very much against intention and agenda, and I was the kind of writing essays where I always wrote the outline after I wrote the essay, if I had to do that for school. But I think that sense of timelessness when one is writing, one is deep inside the poem, wondering where it's going to go, following it, not being a bully to your poem and forcing it somewhere. I think when that's successful and you're in that place, for me, it's really bodiless. I mean, there's no clear sense to me of gender, race, class, personal history, really, or all those things that clearly influence our work. But one is free of all that. And that joy, I think, is that freedom. And that freedom is joy. And that sense of possibility and just putting yourself, I guess, at the will of the poem itself, that the poem is a separate creature and you are just curious as to how it's going to unfold. And so that sense, I think, is the joy. And it's really not finding the self. The whole thing about you write to find yourself, I always thought was kind of baloney. And I think you write to lose yourself. And so I guess that's what I would say.
That's wonderful. And it reminds me of something that another of our poets, Victoria Chang, recently wrote, where and she's been writing, poems that are about the death of her mother or in response, and she just similarly spoke about getting into the moment of the poem. That itself is the reward and the joy, even if you're writing about troubling things. But Shangyang, can I ask you to maybe respond to that question?
I love you write to lose yourself. I think that's so beautiful. And oh dear, joy is something that I would not go into some stuff. I remember a few years ago, my friend, engineer friend, Carl, asked my poet friend Yuki. So he asked Yuki, how do you poets find joy in life? How do you enjoy life? And because as Carl observed, poets don't enjoy life very much. So Yuki responded with all sincerity, enjoy life. Do you mean momentarily? And that is the saddest answer I've ever heard. If joy in life is so momentary, I think the joy in poetry must be comparatively more lasting. Otherwise, I wouldn't keep doing it and remain so crazy about it. For me, personally, the joy of poetry is always in the process of discovery. I remember when I was in high school, I was obsessed with some European modernist poets at the time, and each of their poems is like a small labyrinth through which I find myself just elsewhere and different. in the end. I was just so confounded and so fascinated. So I started writing. I hope to find a different self at the end of each poem. I like the notion that I think Jory Graham mentioned, that the speaker of a poem is a protagonist, not a narrator. The narrator knows the whole picture of the journey, while the protagonist has to find out what is yet to become of them. So I think when I write every word that is yet to be fixated on page, every word, the next word is a mystery to me. I think there's a joy in that. And one could argue that life is mysterious too, it's similar. But in poetry, the consequence of risk being taken, of opening a Pandora box, no matter how harsh it may seem, it eventually is bounded with such tenderness that I think count as joy too. And I do think that for me privately, mainly writing or reading poetry is like living another self, another life.
Thank you for that. I think both you and Marianne both touched upon the very reason I wanted to ask about joy, because I think we do traffic in, kind of bummers, and yet there's something that compels us day in and day out. And I think it's, I mean, I look at the poem that you read and just the sounds, and there is joy within the actual sounds and movement of that language, and what you're doing there on the page and in the mouth and in the ear. So there's definitely joy there, even though we may not always feel joyous. So Laura, could I get you to please respond to the question?
Well, I greatly appreciate what the other poets have said, and I feel relieved that they did not express that they do not write out of joy. I would say that for me, poetry, the reading of it and also the writing of it makes joy in the rest of my life possible, because it's a way for me to shape experience, to take that which has not been joyous, perhaps, and to make something of it, to put it away, to find joy elsewhere. I would also say that during the last, year and a half or so of, as you've mentioned, isolation and change and loss in many ways, not, the loss of some faith, the loss of some friendships, the loss of activities. I have only been able to read poetry. I can't read a pair. I've begun to be able to again, but I have turned to poetry again because it takes this experience of our lives, which is so shapeless and amorphous and temporary, but also eternal and not understandable and ungraspable, and makes it into a thing and is an experience when one writes it and an experience when one reads it. And as both of my fellow poets tonight have said, when I write a poem, it's rarely out of joy. It's to follow, hopefully, my own associations and to come to an understanding of something that I had not previously been able to comprehend or to hold or to make any meaning of until the process of a poem begins, which doesn't always happen. A lot of times I begin with the sense that I will go to that place where I can make meaning, but I have to throw it away and I start again at another time. But that joy is made more possible for me in the rest of my life by reading poems that, if they don't make sense of suffering or loss or confusion, at least turn it into something that is on a page or in my mind and has sound to it and has and brings music to it. And there's release in that, which is, I think, what leads to the possibility of other joys. I think it's a wonderful question. So thank you for asking it.
Well, thank you. Thank all of you. I mean, I get great joy out of all of your works, and to have you among us tonight and to have you among Copper Canyon Press is a source of great joy for all of us. And yes, as somebody has mentioned in the chat box, cats are also joy as well. And my cat is insisting herself upon us tonight. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you again to Tashani, to Marianne, to Shangyang, and to Laura. You've given us so much to feel inspired about and to feel, dare I say, joyful about. And thank you to all of you who have donated tonight. And I look forward to seeing you at another live stream launch down the line. So thank you again, and good night.